Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. This week we have another episode in my series of The System is Failing Our Children. This episode is especially for the families who have decided to stay in their state school, in whatever country you are in. Many of the comments that I make today and the advice that I offer will apply to you no matter where you are. Now, those who just don't really care about what's going on in their schools, and I have had a mother say to me, she just doesn't want to know because then she'd have to take some action and she doesn't want to. Those families are not in my thoughts. The families that I've got in mind are those who are aware something is rotten in the state of Denmark. They know either from hearing about it, or they're not happy with what their children say, or they have seen material that is being taught to their children regarding political information such as gender theories and other political influences such as First Nation. There are major obstacles that it seems have been set up for families who not only are aware, but they want to do something about it. They already know that the system is failing their child, that if nothing happens to change, their child is going to be part of that totally unacceptable percentage of 50% plus who will leave our New Zealand schools functionally illiterate and enumerate. The efforts today are to try and equip you, offer you some suggestions so that you can choose what you are able to do. Families feel that they need to get involved with their school, and it doesn't feel good to be seen as a general troublemaker. That doesn't sit easy with most people. And it isn't something you count on when you put your children into a state school. Families should not feel that their only options are to leave to go to other schools or to homeschools, but it's happening regularly. So this episode is for you, and at no time during this episode can I please reassure you again. I know that you know this is a homeschooling podcast, but my motivation in here is not to try and manipulate you into trying to homeschool. That's not what I'm doing. My motivation here is to support you in the choices that you are making for your children. Now, where you live will make a difference in what measure of progressive curricula is taught. For example, if you are in a left-leaning town or city, there will be more content. If you're in a more conservative area, probably less. Something practical you can consider doing is to go on the PTA or school boards. Some influence may be able to be wielded there, but if some of the subject matter is a Ministry of Education requirement, you might not be able to remove it, but you may be able to manage the how and the quantity taught. I asked for and got some feedback from adults, families and teachers who are in the schools and were willing to say what they thought would be helpful. So first of all, from Neil in the UK, who is a retired secondary school teacher. He says, I would insist on seeing the curriculum and the teacher's scheme of work. In an ideal world, the lesson plans too, but that's probably not realistic as lesson plans can be written 5 minutes before the lesson. The scheme of work should show exactly which topic or topics are planned for each lesson for the term or semester, but not necessarily how it will be taught or with which resources. If freedom of information requests are available in your country, use this option if the school refuses. Question anything you suspect isn't appropriate. Clarify the millions of acronyms that teachers use. Be aware of some of the inappropriate books that schools have in their library. For example, Neil lists Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. If your school has these books, be sure to point out the inappropriate sections. When it comes to any contentious issues, Ask the school which expert guidelines, instructions they're following for that subject. For example, which textbooks and which scientists regarding climate change lessons, which doctors regarding gender lessons, and which organisation regarding their sex ed, etc. It's likely the school may not know. As individual teachers, at least in my experience, teaching ages of 14 years and over, teachers choose their own resources and sources. This might be different for elementary schools. He suggests some more things to ask. Exactly how are diversity, equality, and inclusion taught as part of mathematics, physics, etc.? How is gender taught in biology? Does the teacher insist on non-standard pronouns? He also says it's really important to be polite, calm, and knowledgeable about the issues. Schools love nothing more than to stonewall parents as they see the trouble causes. And it might sound obvious, he says, but if you want to speak to the teacher, don't phone at lunchtime. Phone 5 minutes after the last lesson of the day and expect the teacher to be hard to pin down. Now, whether you can apply all of Neil's advice and suggestions there in your particular area of our lovely globe, I don't know, but there will be some ideas you can put into plan there. From Amy in the US. When it came to sex ed and gender fluidity, they made it really clear at home what they believe as a family. Library books are a big issue at the moment. She says we read books that make us uncomfortable and disagree with our beliefs. That's how you know what you believe about something. Now, my note to this is it's not applicable to primary-aged children, but secondary-aged children. Once they have the ability to think abstractly and have some measure of discernment. Young children are concrete thinkers, and you know what your middle school and teens are ready to be reading. And the age where concrete thinking starts to roll over to more abstract thinking, depending on the child obviously, but can happen any time between 10 and 12 years old. And from a Kiwi mum, she was concerned about her daughter outing herself to her teachers and friends because she has worked out for herself that she does not agree with the gender lessons that are being taught in the school. The parent is worried that her child's grades could suffer if she did. Now, I think that's a terrible thing to have to be concerned about in your school, that they could wield that kind of power over you. But the fear is legitimate. For now, she says, we are keeping quiet. In this environment, you can lose friends, your job, and your career over wrong think, which really annoys her. Yeah, it annoys me too. I think we need allies, she says. If you can have one courageous conversation with somebody and get them thinking, that's a positive start. Now, my comments on that feedback from my friend is that she already knows what is beyond what they're prepared to do as a family, and there is no judgment in that whatsoever. But she also knows what they are capable of. And I will address that particular way of looking at things a little bit longer in the podcast. Moving on. One of the alternatives, if you did decide that the state school wasn't for you, but you didn't want a private school, a faith school, and you don't want a homeschool, someone suggested start your own school, which sounds really impossible, but it isn't, because people do this. But you need the willingness and the commitment of at least one teacher and a handful of families to begin. Obviously, there are legal requirements to fulfill. And this is different to a co-op where parents take responsibility for classes. You are still delegating the education, but with a choice as to how to implement the curriculum that your little school then adopts. My eldest two children, the original school that they attended was in the home of the principal. That was years before my children started school. But it grew to become a multi-teacher school on its own property. A large local church in my area began its own preschool and then primary through to secondary school, and that would be just in the last 10 years or so. They teach from a Christian worldview, but I don't know what curriculum they use. And obviously, within the support network of a church with enough families and interests there, you've got a better chance of actually setting something up. Now, some points I want to make as we go over the list of things and some of the ideas that you might like to consider. And going back to my Kiwi friends' comments, we need to accept that not everyone can do all of these actions, especially the more difficult one. Start with what you can do, and then see what else you can do after that. You are braver than you think. But some are braver than me, and I'm okay with that. I do want to be braver, and I am inspired by those who are, but I have my personal limits, and I need to respect them. Yes, gently push your boundaries, but don't overwhelm yourself. Your children need you to defend them and go into battle on their behalf. But you need to be fit for battle, if we're going to use that metaphor. Think really carefully about that. You don't launch yourself unprepared into battle. You'll be defeated and feel a failure. Be wise, judicious, and get good advice. Do not believe for a second that you are the only one. You're not. Isolation is the tactic of those who want to shame, gaslight, and make you believe that no one else has this problem. And those who are bad people or conspiracy theorists. You know, that dreaded modern insult. Here are some other ideas. Some can be implemented straight away, but others need careful planning. Set about setting up a support group at your school, just by careful diplomatic questioning around with the people that you know, the people that you think might be thinking your way. You'll be able to identify those people who do align with your thoughts, but just like you, they're too scared to say so because they think they're the only one. Get good advice from conservative political groups. They're already involved. So in New Zealand, we have groups such as the New Conservative, that is a political party, and we have a think tank called Family First. I will put these links below. You can go to these websites for some resources and support. What you can do, and you're entitled to do it, is you can remove your child from classes that you object to until alternatives are put into place. So that is something you can do quite quickly. Send copies of objectionable class material to interested people and supportive family members. Anyone who isn't aware and you think they could be supportive when becoming aware. You can get copies of this teaching material via the Family First. I have seen it on their social media platforms. Aim to inform and influence the 40% of the public who do not hold firm views and can be swayed by information. It doesn't mean they're gullible or easy to convince. It just means they're unaware or ignorant of the necessary facts. So, for example, what happened during COVID and other major political pressures that you may find yourself under? Generally what happens is that you've got about 20% at the two extreme ends. So you've got about 20% who absolutely believe, let's say to resist what happened in the last 3 years is the truth, and that's what they do. Then you've got about another 20% who are equally convinced that what the government is telling them is the right thing to do. Now that leaves quite a percentage in the middle. Now those two extremes can be anything between 20 and 30%, hence me calling about 40 of this group in the middle. Don't waste your time by trying to engage or change the mind of people who are at that first 20 to 30% who are absolutely convinced that what is going on in the schools is good and correct and you're just nuts. Just don't waste your breath. Concentrate instead on this middle group who are ready to be swayed one way or the other if they just get someone coming to talk to them diplomatically, with respect, pointing out the things that they just don't know. You'll need to be careful, even though you're dealing with truth. You need to deal with respect with people, especially if some of the things that are being taught in your children's classroom are completely new to them. Regularly, I hear people saying, well, my experience at school was really good, and therefore my kids are going to go to state school. It's not the same. Not when I was at school, and certainly not when our older children were at school. Things have changed, and they've not changed for the better. So justifying why you are staying in school without actually looking at any of the evidence that just might help you decide why you want to stay in school or why you need to be taking some kind of action is a good idea. Please conduct yourself with dignity and don't do anything you'll need to apologize for. That's a really good tip. And along that line, do not lower yourself to personal insults and straw man arguments. Stick to the facts. Know that, yes, you will make enemies, but you will also make new friends. Back in podcast 82, Helen Houghton had a comment on legal action, and it was right at the end of the podcast. I would actually encourage you to listen and then listen to it again over and over, because her interview will help you solidify and decide what it is you are prepared to do. Right at the end of the podcast, she talks about the teacher's code of responsibility towards your family. And where it is prudent, let your teacher know about their code of responsibility towards your family. It's not just about them teaching what the teaching council has directed them to teach. It's about the responsibility they have to you as the parent and by extension your child. There are torts in law, I had to look this up because I hadn't heard of it, about mental injury, which means that if they're going to insist on teaching your children anything that is not in line with your values that they haven't informed you about, they need to be very careful because lawsuits can be brought. Pushing back in law, Helen Houghton feels, could actually be the mechanism by which we are able to implement change. However, I would caution you about how you go about this. Just as in parenting, don't make any threat you're not willing to carry out. Investigate what this means, perhaps via Helen Houghton on the New Conservative website. Empty threats will just make you look silly and put you at a disadvantage. If at any stage you feel that this is becoming too much for you than what is healthy and taking a bigger toll on your family, there is no shame in choosing to leave the school in spite of what you didn't want to do. You are the only one who can decide the if and when and the what you do next. No matter what option you take to tackle the failing of the system for your children, there is help and support for you. And the last thing I want to leave with you is this. Never forget that this is for the sake of your child. Hold fast to the truth. If you think this has been helpful, please like, share, just do those things to get this kind of encouragement out to people. If you find that you would like to talk it through, feel free to get hold of me via my website, comminghomeinfo.com. I'm available for consultation or just basic homeschool counselling. You don't have to be alone in this. All right then, I know this is a heavy subject, but we can't turn away from what's going on and pretend that everything is going to be fine. We've had decades of things not being fine. If you're going to be doing anything about your children's education, the time is now.